Welcome, everyone. So today is the last day of our classes, and today we are also together with the last presenter of the semester, Bahar İnal from 19 Mayıs University. And I just want to introduce her, and then we will have her presentation, and we'll have some time for the Q&A. Here I start. After studying English language and literature at Çankaya University in Turkey, Bahar İnal had a May degree in the Department of British Literary and Cultural Studies at the same university, and wrote a dissertation entitled Gothic Discourse and its Reflection of Discontent in Matthew Lewis's The Monk. In 2006, she started working as a lecturer of English in the Department of Foreign Languages at 19 Mayıs University and still continued to work there. She started a PhD program in the Department of American Culture and Literature at Kadir Has University. Her main academic studies and interests are expressionism in drama, avant-garde theater, literature and philosophy, literature and art history, Gothic literature, existentialism in modern American novel and drama, Victorian literature. She attended and keeps on attending a number of conferences, both as a speaker and as a delegate, and currently she studies art history. So, thank you, Bahar Hocam, for coming and joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. Yes, the title of my presentation is The Cultural Spirit of an Age, the World as Represented by Expressionist Art and the Theatre of the Absurd. But personally, I'm particularly interested in the Expressionist art. But I see both movements, the absurd movement and expressionist movement, very closely interrelated to each other. So yes, what is absurd? In contemporary literature and criticism, the term absurd is applied to the sense that human beings cut off from their roots are living in meaningless isolation in an alien universe. The philosophical basis of the absurd is a form of existentialism which views human beings as moving from nothingness, from which they come back to nothingness, in which they will end through an existence marked by anguish and absurdity, unquote. People live in a universe in which there is no way to establish a significant relationship between themselves and their environment. Born into a world without reason, I quote, modern man seems continually less able to find order and meaning in this life, unquote. Extreme forms of illogic, inconsistency, nightmarish fantasy dominate contemporary literature and culture where this concept prevails. Nightmarish fantasy, inconsistency are also very important motifs that will be analyzed in expressionist art. Existentialism is a 19th and 20th century philosophical movement. It stresses the radical extent of human freedom and attempts to deal with its consequences on everyday lives of people. It is a tradition frequently associated with the French philosophers Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, and also German philosopher Martin Heidegger. The current movement can also be defined as such, I quote, since 1940s, there has been a widespread tendency, especially prominent in the existential philosophy of men of letters, such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, to view a human being as an isolated existence, cast into an alien universe, to conceive it as possessing no inherent truth, value, and meaning, and to represent human life as an existence which is both anguish and absurd, unquote. Besides the existentialist worldview, the literature of the absurd has also its roots in the movement of expressionism and surrealism, with their portrayals of grotesque and bizarre images. The movement has emerged after World War II as a rebellion against the prevailing beliefs and values of both traditional culture and literature. Being one of the outstanding pioneers of existential literature and philosophy, Camus overtly mentions the attitude of the modern man in one of his masterpieces, The Rebel, claiming that the only way to keep one's dignity in such an incomprehensible universe is to reject all the social and moral boundaries imposed upon him, for he has to find a means to survive in a world in which traditionally accepted concepts are subverted, and in which absurdity reigns supreme as a natural outcome of this subversion of order to disorder, sanity to insanity, rationality to irrationality, logic to illogicality. Unlike the ordered and seemingly rational world to which man relates easily, modern man has to cope with an unintelligible universe rendered as an, I quote, or organized chaos, a demonic mixture of order and anarchy, unquote. Likewise, the modern dramatist or the absurd dramatist takes up Camus' challenge through adopting a rebellious attitude, which makes him expelled from the social cause of the world. He relentlessly questions the discordance, the insanity, the subversion of values, and traditionally validated concepts which have made his existence unjustifiable and incoherent. Constantly confronted with a domineering sense of absurdity, he begins to defend his position as an artist by consciously violating the established social order which is imposed upon him in the guise of rationality and stability. I quote, "Our society, by separating theology and morals, as well as rejecting the Marxian metaphysics, has cut itself off from a Dostoevskian existence and thereby lost its transcendence. This loss of transcendence has affected contemporary revolt in various ways. For many modern writers, meaning and purpose are not an integral part of the universe. On the contrary, the world is characterized by lack of significance and coherence. Meaning has to be created by the individual out of the actual experience of revolt," unquote. The role of the dramatist inevitably changes from a social dramatist to an unconformist as he no longer depicts life as it is and answers the requirements of conventionality. His primary concern becomes man and his strange predicament in an illogical universe. The roots of his rebellion lies in romantic movement, which goes against all sorts of rationalist thinking. Because romantic poesy and romantic movement is also very revolutionary. So that's why I think the theater of the absurd has its roots in the romantic movement too. Opposed to a mechanical vision of the universe, Goethe, Wordsworth, Blake, Byron, Shelley, and others engage the world, creating subjectivist perspectives rather than distant Aristotelian-based objective observation of strict casualty. What they saw was that change, disorder, and this equilibrium could be viewed as positive rather than negative features of darkness. Because remember, romantics were very much interested in the dark side of human beings, so that's why they have a relation to both theater of the absurd and existentialist movement as well. Therefore, modern man and dramatist, following the footsteps of his romantic forefathers, suddenly gets estranged from a social environment that is hostile to him and becomes a metaphysical rebel, a militant of the ideal, an anarchic individualist concerned with the impossible rather than the possible, unquote. Having made a break with the style of a well-made play with an elaborate surface, the realm of the dramatist thus extends to the very roots of human existence that is unjustly disembodied by the social reformers and writers. Thus confronted with subverted, absolute, and fully confirmed of the meaninglessness he is entrapped in, the castaway individual has to build up his own code of sanity, rationality, and stability, and begins to defend his position by consciously violating the established social order and define what is imposed on him in the guise of sanity and stability. As a result, modern man and artists try to find a way out for genuine communication, and in parallel with this, an urgent need for the expression of the self or the ego and the universe unprecedented before shows itself in diverse artistic forms such as expressionism, futurism, cubism, dadaism, and surrealism. What those artistic trends have in common is that they are all anti-bourgeois, declaring war on every sort of conformity, rationality, and order. The term theater of the absurd is invented by Martin Esslin. It portrays not a series of connected incidents telling a story in a traditional structure of cause and effect relationship as in any Aristotelian play, but a pattern of disordered images presented people as bewildered beings in an incomprehensible universe. According to Camus, who first used the term absurd, absurdity is the major concern of the 20th century mankind. The sense of absurdity can come to any man at any time. One feels alien, a stranger even to himself. This feeling arises through an encounter between the world and in seeming the rational demands of the people. Specifically, absurdity arises from the confrontation between human needs and the very temporality of the world that makes these needs meaningless. Yet Camus claims that such absurdity should not cast people into an utter state of hopelessness. Yes, despite his worldview, Camus can be considered as a very optimist philosopher because the message he gives us is that just accept the world as it is. So when we accept the world as it is, we also free ourselves. We have a sense of freedom and independence. That's why Albert Camus defends the optimist, the positive side of the absurd. By contrast, the acceptance of the absurdity will bring people the solution they look for. The theater of the absurd, on the other hand, reveals the negative signs of Camus' existentialism and expresses the hopelessness and futility of a world which seems to have no purpose. Beckett, Ionesco, Pinter, and Elby are the most notable representatives of the absurd drama. However, the first true practitioner of the absurd drama is the French playwright Alfred Jarry. He is truly accepted as the originator of such drama due to his play Ubu Roy. Roy is an emperor, he has a gigantic body, and he takes pleasure from being cruel to people. And all the play is dominated by grotesque imagery. Almost all the absurd playwrights portray the bleak images of life to render human existence as imprisoned and entrapped. The life, therefore, has only temporary freedom. In Ionesco's The Chairs, the main subject is imprisonment, the dissolution of the mind and the body, the loss of personal integrity. The world as portrayed by Ionesco is insecure. We are even afraid of non-existent beings. In such drama, every signal from the stage is a direct representation of irrationality designed to surprise and shock the audience. Ionesco often uses grotesque imagery in order to emphasize the irrational aspects of life and man. In The Chairs, an old couple lives in isolation in an apartment that gradually fills with so many chairs that it becomes almost impossible to move and breathe, so the atmosphere is very claustrophobic. They create guests in their imaginations and talk to them, but in fact there are no guests. But because they are very lonely people, they create people on their minds just to communicate. They think that the guests will come and therefore they should bring more chairs, but the guests never come in reality. The case is very similar to that of Becca's Waiting for Godot. Vladimir and Estragon wait for a message that never comes. In Ionesco's play, a messenger comes, but with no identity. We don't know who the messenger is, but he gives a very incomprehensible message and will read. We don't know the meaning of it. Ionesco doesn't tell us what the message means, but we know that this message comes to terrify the couple. I mean, to increase their anxiety, because modern man is already full of anxiety, and this incomprehensible message that just triggers the anxiety in their hearts. And that's all the message, and he goes away. The couple remains as more bewildered than ever. The search for finding meaning and security is interrupted. This is my favorite, actually. It's a brilliant political satire, and one of the brilliant exposures of political satire ever written. With its fascinating grotesque imagery, the play is mainly an attack on the Nazi state. Ionesco attempts to show how political conformity destroys dignity and originality of man. In his celebrated book, Notes and Counter-Notes, Ionesco explains his hostility against all kinds of ideological systems because they undermine the freedom of mind. Yes, Ionesco, I think just like George Orwell, has lost all his trust in ideological systems because for Ionesco, all the ideological systems have gone bankrupt. I quote, quite simply, I thought it was my job to reveal the insanity of these terrible systems, what they can lead to, how they stir people up, stupefy them, and then reduce them to slavery, unquote. So what happens in the play? Every character in the street, one by one, is transforming into a rhinoceros, and at the end of the play, all the people have become are becoming rhinoceros gradually, and they become identical, of course. Ionesco aims at drawing the attention of the audience to the enslaving ideologies through the horrifying portrayals of all the characters transforming into a rhinoceros. He discusses fanaticism and extremity. And why rhinoceros? Because people are just primitive beings. That's why I think he has chosen rhinoceros to show the primitive side of the man. The title of the play symbolizes the political ideologies and group that Ionesco hates. He hates any kind of commitment and the language of slogans because he strongly believes that slogans are the sickness of our time. Endgame by Beckett is another absurd masterpiece. Two central characters, Ham and Chloe, emerge as ruthless beings, as if they had no relation with the outside world. They live in a small basement, just like the couple in Ionesco's The Chairs, in which there is almost no life, no light, no joy. They cannot even see what is happening at the outside. Chloe is Ham's servant. They are both subjected to each other. Ham is both physically and psychologically crippled, and crippled figures will emerge in expressionist paintings too. In expressionist paintings, crippled figures are mostly war veterans. Chloe, on the other hand, tries to find a meaning and he prays God, and his prayers go unanswered. No one hears them. The world presented in Endgame is even gloomier than Waiting for Godot, for here is neither the slightest sign of hope nor the hope of salvation through the arrival of an unknown being. Everything is in utter darkness. Harold Pinter, he is also classified as a writer in Comedy of Menace. Dumbwaiter has a grim vision of life. He reflects spiritless characters, wholly negative and nihilistic. They are victimized by some invisible forces acting upon them. For example, in the play, an unseen authority always gives some commands to Ben and Gaz, two serial killers, but they never learn the real identity of the authority, just like the messenger in The Chairs. They don't know who is he. And the last command they hear is to kill each other. That is a highly startling ending. The world is terribly insecure and dangerous. Human existence is similarly insecure and uncertain. After Ionesco, Pinter is the most socio-politically engaged writer among the absurd playwrights. In his plays, he demonstrates how modern man is blocked and destroyed by the system. The power structures of society are based on the relationship between the exploiter and the exploited. Like the other stage techniques of the absurd playwrights, Pinter's theatrical stage is almost empty and cut to the bone, which also reflects the inner emptiness of the characters. This is also a radical break from the conventional plot and setting structure of the naturalist theater. The last one, The American Dream by Edward Albee, is also one of the most striking examples of the theater of the absurd, which reveals the basic characteristics of the related literature. In the play, one witnesses dehumanization of human life by modern culture and society. Such life is a process of victimization of the individual to discover the rationale for existence, the meaning of life, and the structure of the universe. Yet the ultimate result attained is the individual identity deconstructed and decomposed into nothingness. Edward Albee, like his contemporary absurd playwrights, shows his characters as shattered into pieces, disintegrated and disillusioned. Such fragmentation leads them towards nihilism, which casts the characters into a dead and decadent universe in which there is no integrity between life and themselves, between which there is nothing promising, and in which there is no way to establish constructive communication between themselves and their environment. In The American Dream, we see the young man, but he's just called as the young man. We don't know his name. So he's without an identity, just a young man, a clean-cut Midwestern beauty, an almost perfect type for the family. He epitomizes the opposite archetype of the American Adam. The young man as the American Dream is a false mask without a man behind it, just a shallow identity, or a man dangling up in the air, in other words. As he tells grandma, we also don't know the name of the grandma. She's just called as the grandma, so she's also without identity. He's only a type, which means that he has no character, no unity, no distinguishing figures. He has failed in the process of becoming an individual. Now, when we look at Expressionism, historically, it's a German movement in literature and visual arts, which has flourished during and after World War I, and which has been at its height in 1914 and 1925. The most characteristic quality of that movement is a departure from the stark realism of naturalism by using dreams, nightmares, and fantasies as means of depicting human life and universe. Expressionism is above all a radical revolt in subject matter and style. It is quite unique in its depiction of the external reality, which is converted into pure fantasy. The Expressionist artists adopt the modern sense of individual creativity. They perceive the world from the viewpoint of their ego and reflect the world through inner experiences. Many artists in the beginning of the 20th century have sought subjective inspiration while creating their art, and this artistic quest has allowed them to create very intensely. Technically, they never use a classical composition. Rather, they picture life and humanity in non-linear composition. And again, there are some technical details. Through the usage of vivid colors, distorted figures, crippled figures, savage and disturbing imagery, harsh and even angry brush strokes, sharp lines, and a nightmarish composition with a restless atmosphere, just like the theater of the absurd, they reflect the modern man and the world as perverted. Terror and anguish replace hope. Being the pioneers of Expressionism in art, German painters Oskar Kokoschka, Max Beckmann, George Grosz, Otto Dix, and Ernst Ludwig Kurschner strikingly depicts the true face of humanity during the war period. Like the dramatists of the theater of the absurd, these artists exhibit mainly outcasts, psychologically paralyzed figures, fallen men expelled from society. Their works anticipate the horrific picture of the Nazi period, which will call and label Expressionist art as degenerate. You know, the propaganda minister Goebbels in Nazi period, he organized an exhibition, and the name of the exhibition was Degenerate Art, and all the Expressionist artists and their works were exhibited in this exhibition, and they were labeled as degenerate artists. It's a shame from history. Yes, the first, actually, when we talk about Expressionism or Expressionist art, the first painting and the first artist that come to our mind is most probably the Scream by Albert Munch. But because I'm sure all of you know the Scream and Albert Munch, I decided to choose another one, and for me, which is more beautiful and more striking. This is by Oskar Kokoschka, The Tempest, and the other name of this painting is The Bride of the Wind. When you look at the atmosphere, it's very chaotic, very claustrophobic, and it reminds us of a war scene. And you see two figures. One of them is a woman, and the other man is a man, and they are lying, but they are not lying on a bed, and they are not lying on a sofa. They are embracing each other. The man is awake, and the woman is sleeping on the chest of the man. It looks as if they are in the middle of a big ocean or in the middle of a big sea, and all of a sudden a big wave is going to come towards them, and it is going to swallow them. I mean, I'm going to throw them away. So that's why the couple doesn't seem in a very, a peaceful atmosphere, in a very secure atmosphere. And that was the purpose of the Oskar Kokoschka. And we can also read this painting as an allegory of human relationships, because human relationships in the modern age are also very much complicated and unstable. So this is also an allegory of human relationships in the 20th century. You see, I mean, dark colors, dark blue, and the bodies are painted in white and gray, not completely white, but the mixture of white and gray. Yes, when we look at the details, Kokoschka combines stormy nature with complicated human emotions. It is an allegory of human relations in the modern age. At the center, there are two lovers, far from being in a secure state. The atmosphere surrounding them is dark, nightmarish, and unstable. It looks as though they are in the middle of a sea, and all of a sudden, a big wave is going to swallow them. The brush strokes are very harsh, angry, and maybe full of anxiety and very random, making the atmosphere even more chaotic and catastrophic. The dark blue color and the white color of the bodies turn into mud-like color. By the way, the colors used by expressionist artists are considered as anti-naturalist colors. What do I mean by anti-naturalist colors? They are disturbingly very bright, very vivid, and they are so bright that they almost tire the eye of the viewer. Yes, so mud-like colors symbolizing how the world is getting worse and worse in the eyes of the artist, and human beings are entrapped into uncertainty. The next painting I've chosen is George Grosz and another German painter, The Pillars of Society. This name, I mean, The Pillars of Society, is coming from the name of, it is derived from a play by Henrik Ibsen, the Norwegian playwright, because Henrik Ibsen was also very much critical of the 19th society he was living in. It's a very interesting painting, I think, The Pillars of Society, I mean, in quotation marks, The Pillars of Society. In the composition, in the center of the composition, there are four main characters. But when we look at the foreground, we see a fire. There's a building, and inside the building, there's a fire. So we quickly understand that there is a war. It's a war scene. And we see two soldiers, and but they ignore the war, they ignore the fire. I mean, they don't care about the people. They are just going to kill people with the guns in their hands. They are ignorant of other people. And there's a priest, a clergyman, and the clergyman, he's also ignorant. He doesn't also care about the other people. He doesn't care that people are dying. He doesn't care that people are, you know, killing each other. The soldiers don't care about the clergyman, and the clergyman doesn't care about the soldiers. He just preaches, but he preaches unconsciously. I mean, no one actually pays attention to him. And he's portrayed very fat. I mean, his body is very fat. He's just like a caricature-like character, maybe just like a Dickens character, because Dickens characters are also very much like caricature. He has a red nose, a red cheeks, so he's fat and he's very unsympathetic. And when we look at in the foreground, we see three other characters. On the right, we see a social democrat, but a seemingly social democrat, a seemingly socialist. How do we understand that he's a socialist? There's a pamphlet in his hand, and on the pamphlet, it is written in German, socialism must work. So this is a slogan, socialism must work, but it doesn't work, of course. And when you look at his head, his skull is open. Did you see it? And out of the skull, there rises how can I say, it is waste, bodily waste. I'm sure you understand what I mean. Just it's bodily waste. And from this bodily waste, what do we understand? We see the ugliness of his character. We see the ugliness of his mentality, or the dirtiness of his mentality. And on the right, we see a journalist. And on his head, there is a pot, which is a very grotesque imagery, very bizarre and also very funny. And this pot symbolizes his lack of intelligence, his lack of sensitivity, his ignorance, because he's also very funny. And he holds some newspapers in his hands. And in the middle, there's an aristocrat. Did you see the sign on his tie? Swastika. Swastika was one of the symbols of the Nazi period. It was one of the symbols of the Nazi party. We see just half of his face. There's a scar on his cheek. His face is very angry, and we see his teeth, and his skull is also open. And what you see on the top of his skull, when you look closely, you see a horse image. And on the horse, there's a soldier maybe a warrior. So we understand that he's still preoccupied with the image of war. He's still preoccupied with the idea of war. He still wants to fight. He wants glory. So yes, George Cross criticizes those pillars of society and shows that they're just, unnecessary people actually. He criticizes the supporters of fascism and dictatorship in Germany during the 1920s. These supporters represent bourgeois class and hierarchically they have a higher status. The style is very sarcastic and the figures drawn are caricature-like. By showing these figures as highly grotesque, Gross gives us the message that the social institutions represented by those important and respectable men are in fact morally corrupt. Yes, another painting by George Cross is The Funeral. You can read it as the funeral of the society, but for George Cross, it is the funeral of the political system. The colors are also here very anti-naturalistic. You can see there is a fight, there is a war between the colors. It's a very bloody scene, a very bloody atmosphere. We just see the heads and not the bodies of the people, and the people just push each other in order to go ahead. They overlap one another, and they just don't care about each other. And we see high buildings, and the buildings look as though they are going to collapse, and people are going to be crushed under the wreckage of the buildings. So it's also a war depiction, a war atmosphere, a warlike atmosphere, and very nightmarish at the same time. As might be understood from the title of the painting, Gross creates a very chaotic atmosphere in which people are spiritually dead. During the war years, Gross concerns himself particularly with the subjects of war, crime, terror, murder, death, and big cities. The funeral covers all these themes in a very aggressive atmosphere. The colors are very energetic. Yes, I call this the war of colors, the fight of colors, increasing and triggering the violence in the painting. The city can be read as a symbol of the world going insane. Yes, the world is going insane, but the people are also going insane. George creates a very dynamic composition dominated by figures pushing and overlapping one another. The faces are unclear and mask-like, showing that no one cares each other and everyone has lost their sense of direction. Yes, each one is going somewhere, but we don't know where they are going. So there's a sense of, there's no sense of direction in that painting. People have lost their sense of direction in a bloody fight. In short, this is the funeral of the society filled with dehumanization. Another painting is Otto Dix, another German painter, and the name is Prager Street. Actually, Prager Street is a very popular street in Dresden, Germany, but a very luxurious street. But in that painting, Otto Dix doesn't show us the street as luxurious and very popular and very social. Just the contrast. We see two figures. They are war veterans. One of them with the yellow beard. His face is sunken and he's a beggar. He begs money. He hardly tries to survive. He depends on the mercy of other people in order to survive. And one of his arms is wooden. So we understand that he has lost some parts of his body during the war. And we see another crippled figure. He's not a beggar, but he has also lost his legs because we see him on a wheel cart. So yes, they are war veterans and they are alienated from society because no one cares about them. People just ignore them. But there's an important detail, a very interesting detail in the painting. When you look in the background, you see a macabre shop, the window of a macabre shop. They are full of, the shop window is full of grotesque images, disjointed body parts. You see hair, you see heads, you see a very unsympathetic toy, and they contribute to the grotesque atmosphere, to the nightmarish atmosphere of the painting. Yes, Prager Street by Otto Dix mainly focuses on the traumatic consequences of war. Therefore, he draws the portraits of disabled war veterans bitterly ignored by society. Dix deliberately creates ugly figures to show how war deteriorates human body. By the way, I want to open a parenthesis. Expressionist artists never depict a human body in a perfect style. That was the job of the Renaissance artist, because when you look at the Renaissance paintings, you see a human body almost perfect. But for the Expressionist artists, we are not perfect beings. We are just, crippled beings. We are traumatized. We are paralyzed beings. So that's why they deliberately distort. They deliberately use distorted figures and distorted images. Prager is a very popular street in Dresden, but in that painting, it's a street where war veterans are alienated and begging for money. So people have lost their belief in war. In the foreground of the composition, two crippled figures are noticed. The one with the sunken face and yellow beard creates pathos. Yes, we feel mercy, pity for him. The other man pulls himself on the wheels of a cart because he seems to have lost his legs at war. On the upper part, the windows of a macabre shop is depicted, and the shop is very grotesque, exhibiting absurd details like disjointed body parts, hair heads, and etc. Yes, there's also a very important detail. On the wheel cart, you see a newspaper, and on the newspaper, there's a headline that says "Jews out," and this was the propaganda of anti-Semitism during the post-war years. Yes, this is my favorite artist from the Expressionist period, Ernst Ludwig Kurschner. His life was marked by tragedy. After this famous exhibition of a degenerate exhibition organized by the Nazi party, he committed suicide because he couldn't endure such a shame. He couldn't endure that his paintings were labeled as degenerate, so he took his own life. This is considered as one of his most famous paintings. It is a panorama from the Berlin street. When I first saw this painting, it was, I think, about 20 years ago when I was still a student. The first thing that captured my attention and still captures my attention is the expression of vanity, arrogance on the faces of the characters, full of arrogance, full of vanity, full of indifference, because still when I look around myself, I see faces very similar to those faces. So still, this painting is very special for me. The distorted images, the distorted faces of the figures in this painting are very similar to the facial expressions of modern man. They are very sharp, I mean, the bodies are depicted as sharp, the colors are very vivid, and the females here are prostitutes, or we can say street walkers. In that period, prostitutes in Berlin had to dress very elegantly, very smartly, because if they didn't do it, the police was going to capture them. So in order not to be captured by the police, they had to hide their true identities. They had to hide that they were prostitutes. Therefore, they were dressed very elegantly. Just look at the heads and look at the figures, and you can understand it. Like many expressionist artists, Kurschner also concerns himself with the idea of the big city. Yes, almost all the expressionist artists are very much interested in the big city life, not small or nature. They are not interested in nature, but big city life. With vivid, anti-naturalistic colors, Kurschner takes us to his overcrowded Berlin in a highly suffocating, claustrophobic atmosphere. At the center of the composition, there are two prostitutes who are dressed very elegantly with a heavy makeup on their faces. The depiction of the prostitutes and the expression of vanity on their faces symbolize modern life and modern man. Behind the glittering faces, there lies cynicism and darkness. And the last painting I chosen is again from Ernst Ludwig Kurschner. It is Potsdamer Platz. Potsdam is in Berlin. In the center of the composition, again, we see two female figures, and they are prostitutes too. They are also dressed very elegantly, especially the woman in black, the lady in black. She wears a hat with a veil. She completely hides her face, her identity, and there's another woman next to her. She is dressed in blue, and behind there are men. The men are faceless. They are attracted to the women, they are chasing the women, but they don't want to show it. They don't want to show that they are interested in the women, because they still want to show to the society that they are very, decent people. They lead very decent lives, but this is not true. But actually, they are interested, they are attracted to the women. And you know, the street, it is all along the street, there is a mixture of dark blue and light blue. And next to the the red, by the way, in the foreground, the red building is a post office. And next to the post office, you see a cafe. So this is a nightlife from Berlin, and it's also very claustrophobic. Potsdamer Platz is Kurschner's one of the disturbing city life experiences. Berlin for Kurschner is a symbol of poverty, fascism, and moral degeneration. The clothes of the ladylike figures are smart but bizarre at the same time. The hats, the feathers, the tight corsets, and faceless men seeming to chase the women, the red station behind, light and dark green color all along the street haunt the imagination of Kurschner. The result is a unique inner experience marked by a strong sense of tragedy. But I want to mention one last detail, and I think this is the most beautiful detail in the painting. You see the circle pavement in the foreground on which the two female figures are standing. I think it's very similar to the theater stage. The circle theater stage. So here I remember Shakespeare, and I remember his famous sentences in As You Like It. What does Shakespeare say? All the world is a stage, and we are just actors and actresses playing and performing our roles. And when our roles are finished, we are going to be forgotten. And this is the message I get from this painting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening to me. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Bahar Hocam. Thanks a lot. It was interesting, especially those paintings and your interpretation of them. So are there any questions, comments for Bahar Hoca?
Sure. Is the floor open?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Bahar. It was nice to hear from you today, and thank you for talking to us. I have kind of a long question, but it's more like a problem that I've been dealing with in terms of the absurd, and I hope you could help me because you address so much of it. And it has to do with whether it's possible to talk about the absurd or whether the absurd is something that's beyond language. And a lot of that was because I was thinking about how the absurd in general resists symbolization and also would resist any attempt to kind of reason with it or what have you. So the question is then, is it possible to talk about the absurd? And if it's not, how do we address it?
I mean, you mean the philosophy of the absurd?
Or the absurd as an object, yeah, as a thing.
You ask it in terms of expressionist art or just the term as absurd?
Just in terms of the absurd itself.
Well, I can define absurd as meaninglessness. For me, it is meaninglessness. But once, as Camus says, once we understand and capture this meaninglessness, I think our lives automatically will become more meaningful. Because when we accept absurd and when we accept that life is absurd, yes, because you know the myth of Sisyphus. I think it very skillfully describes this philosophy. When we understand that our actions, the everyday life, the routine of life is totally meaningless, then we understand what absurd is. Because we come to the world, we live, we try to survive, but we are going to die. So isn't it absurd? For me, this is absurd, just meaninglessness. And it is very, I think for me, very hard to cope with it. Because as Camus says, one morning you wake up all of a sudden and you realize that life is absurd. So it's really a very harsh feeling to deal with. But once you accept it, then I think you will find a way to deal with life or to make peace with life. So for me, it is simply meaninglessness and the acceptance of this meaninglessness. That's it. I can describe it like this. For you, what is it? I don't know if I have given the answer to your question, but
well, in the sense that it's meaninglessness, yeah, I can work with that, and it's kind of deviating away from the topic now. So thank you.
Can I just make a comment, and perhaps this may just, a comment for Jeff as well, because I was thinking of the same thing, and I was thinking, the art that you showed us, and drama and art, they are from mostly 1920s, right?
Yes.
But the
Post-war
world,
period.
yeah, the world we live in is not any better place. So we may still talk about the art of the absurd, in arts, etc. But we don't see them that much, right? I mean, we don't necessarily meet an absurd theater. We don't necessarily see such paintings. I wonder, it was more like, and when I look at those paintings, yes, I think it is possible to address the absurd and represent absurd, because there are many ways. Although they are very symbolic and allegorical in many ways, I also think that they are very direct and open in a way. Even the examples of drama that you gave, because it's easy to interpret them somehow. But why don't we have them now? We are still living in a bad world, but do you think the ways of representation, in art, in literature, is it because it has become more subtle? Is that why we don't necessarily see this kind of art any longer, and that kind of drama as well? I mean, this is me. Perhaps I'm ignorant because I don't really read drama and go to the plays that much. So it may be just my ignorance, but I also noticed that it's somehow evolved into something else. We're not really talking about this kind of art, but we are still living in an absurd world. Why did it stop, if it's the case?
I can ask it in a different style. I can say, why doesn't the world create any more Dostoevsky or any more Mozart or any more Shakespeare? I'm also asking the same question, but I think there is no answer to this question. And as to your question, personally, I'm not very much interested in contemporary art. I'm not interested in postmodern art. And personally, I say no to postmodernism. I'm against postmodernism, and I cannot define what postmodernism is. Yes, I agree, the paintings have become more subtle and for me more meaningless. For example, when I visit a museum in a European city, I don't visit the sections of contemporary art. I want to go, I force myself, but when I stand in front of those contemporary paintings, I cannot understand them. I cannot get the message. Because maybe, as you said, I'm ignorant about the contemporary art. I'm ignorant about postmodernism, but I don't know. I don't know why we don't have such paintings anymore. Maybe artists continue to create, but I don't know why we are unaware of those paintings. But personally, I'm not a person interested in contemporary art and contemporary artists, and especially postmodern literature. I'm against it. Personally, I'm a classical person. I like classical art. I like Baroque. I like Rococo. For me, this expressionism is too modern. It is too modern, because I'm still living in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the Romantic period. Even expressionism for me is too modern. Do you understand what I mean?
I understand, I think. Okay. Are there any comments or questions?
Yes, Evren Hocam, can I?
Of course.
This is not a question, but I would like to get your opinion, Bahar Hocam. First of all, thank you for your nice presented paper. And that was very valuable for me to listen. Yes, I agree with you when you said, especially for the quotation you got from Albert Camus, and you said that he urges his reader to think the positive side of the life, right? And then somewhere in your paper you stated that the sense of absurdity can come to any man at any time, right? Just thinking, yeah, this is true in our life. So I would like to ask you and to get your approach, your explanation. And how can we create our own subjective meaning in this absurd world where there is, as you said, no life, no light, no joy? And how can we find a personal meaning, happiness, a tranquility, and the peace in this irrational meaningfulness, hopelessness, and chaotic world? Yeah, this is my question.
How
yes.
can we find happiness?
Yes, because you said, as Albert Camus said, he says, human condition is absurd, and all absurd playwrights indicate this theme in their plays. Yeah, and just I would like to learn how you approach this issue, this matter. What will be your humble explanation?
Well, personally, I try to find meaning because for me, yes, the world is meaningless and the human communications are meaningless. I try to find meaning in art. I think all we have is art. That's why, for me, the most important thing in life is art. I depend on art. I try to find consolation and happiness in art and also in literature. But if you ask me, happiness, I cannot define it because I don't believe in happiness. I don't think there is happiness and there is unhappiness. And it's very difficult to define them. But if we don't try to define happiness and unhappiness, I think we will be more happy. Do you understand what? If we force ourselves to define them, we will be more unhappy. But just if we, stop defining them or stop forcing ourselves, I will be happy, I want to be happy, then I don't find it true. We won't find happiness. If there is happiness, I don't know. But this search for happiness is totally meaningless. You should find something to hold on to. You should find something, to survive. It can be art, it can be literature, it can be your family, but something that will contribute or that will bring meaning to your life. But not, I won't consider it as happiness. Just something, for me, it is art, mostly art. And for the last years, I just focus on art, just artistry. Because I just find meaning in those artists, in those paintings, and nothing at all, not the author society, not the political system, not universities, although I'm an academic, just art.
Yeah, very optimistic way of your thought. Thank you very much, Bahar Hocam.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
I see one question here in the chat section by Çağrı. And she's asking, are there cultural commonalities in the absurd? Does each absurd bear its own meaninglessness for each person, for each culture?
For expressionism is a German movement. So I try to focus on the German side of expressionism. And for absurd theater, I have chosen from England, from France, from America. It was a popular movement in Europe, and mostly popular in England, in France, and in Poland, and in Germany. But I'm not sure about the other countries. But I know that it has become popular in European countries in the beginning of the 20th century.
And for us, maybe I'm thinking of a couple of examples. Perhaps it's more Kafkaesque for us, who knows, more bureaucratic. I'm thinking of the Time-Sitting Institute, for example. It's absurd, right? And it's
actually, yes, I should have mentioned Kafka here too, because Kafka is also, I think, very much expressionist, very much absurd with, his grotesque imageries, insect-like figures. Yes, Kafkaesque. Very true, especially for expressions artists.
I see one message from Jason, and he posted a painting, and you may see it in the link. It's called Goethe's Merry-Go-Round.
Hello, there's a picture of it here. It's on the front cover of this book. It's a painting that D.H. Lawrence fell in love with and said that it should be bought for the nation. And
Okay.
yeah, it's actually by Gertler, who was one of his friends, well, became one of his friends because of this painting. And what I like about this is it seems to be doing something different to the ones that you've shown, because one of the ones you've shown, I've noticed that there's a kind of a lack of symmetry in them. There's always something a bit off. The angles are never quite right. It's not quite, you know, nothing is kind of perfect. It's almost like the kind of canted angles in film noir that it's unsettling. Like the one that you've got open right now. I like the kind of I like what you said about the stage that the prostitutes are standing on, but to me, I saw it as more like a spotlight. And this is a technique that they use in comic books too. In fact, Mouse uses it, the spotlight thing all the time to show certain things. But you've got the spotlight, and then you also have this kind of diagonal coming down in a very kind of threatening way. But this one, what I like about this is it uses symmetry to create this kind of repetition of absurdity, because this was an anti-war poster after the First World War. And he actually saw some soldiers on Hampstead Heath on this fairground ride, you know, and they've been wounded in the war, and they were still trying to go on with their lives in uniform. You know, and they were being sent back out there to be slaughtered by machines and so on. So it was kind of, it captured the merry-go-round. It just captured this kind of ridiculous meat grinder that they were all being thrown into. So yeah, anyway, so yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason,
that wasn't really a question, just a
Jason,
response.
yeah. Thank you. How can I find this book?
Oh, this is not a book about Gertler. This is a book about the short story, but they've used it. They've used this picture on the cover, which I was very surprised when I bought this book, so I didn't realize. No, but it's the picture. I've sent you the link to the picture. It's by Mark Gertler, and it's from 1913.
It's in the chat. You may see the link in the chat.
On the chat. Okay. Yes. Okay. I should take it.
Oh, and also you mentioned about absurdist literature. There's some really great absurdist literature still being written. Magnus Mills. But I know you hate postmodernism, but Magnus Mills is the master of absurdist fiction.
Can I see it again, please? Can you show it again?
Yeah, Magnus Mills. He manages to capture the ways in which we always kind of subjugate enjoyable things to ridiculous bureaucratical systems. You know, this is what I like about him.
Jason has a brilliant paper about that too, right, Jason?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not brilliant, but it's a paper.
Oh, yes. He's a contemporary playwright.
It's not a play. It's a novella. He's written loads of novellas, yeah, they all follow a similar kind of theme. He used to be a bus driver, so he learned a lot from driving buses about the kind of the systems that he had to abide by, and he wrote about that too. It's very funny. So yeah.
Thank you for your comment, Jason. Okay. Thank you so much.
Any more questions, comments? I guess not.
How did you decide to maybe work on this?
When I was a student, I was very much interested in absurd playwrights, especially Samuel Beckett, Eugene Ionesco, and Edward Albee was the first playwright. I think we studied at university, and The American Dream was the first play. And from them on, I'm always fascinated by the absurd play, but I'm not very much interested in the contemporary aspect now. But for art, I love expressionist art. I love it very much. And for me, this is just the last modernism. And after this, there is no art for me, because I don't believe in contemporary art. I love art, and I regularly give some art seminars in Istanbul, but they are mostly, about classical paintings and Baroque paintings. But Expressionism, I think it is a very special place in the history of art because of the subject matters it covers, especially the war, fascism, fanaticism, and they are very, universal issues, and they are very still valid today. Propaganda, anti-propaganda, bloody fights, bloody scenes, degeneration, political figures. They are very popular. They are unfortunately still in our lives. We cannot get rid of them. I want to, but I cannot. So that's why I found Expressionism and Expressionists are very valid today, still valid. The messages they convey us. I hope I could just explain the messages. They are very universal. Kurschner is particularly. And personally, I had the chance to visit his paintings when I visited Berlin. Just stand in front of them. They are, very in size, quite big. And when you stand in front of them, I mean, it's a really different experience.
Cool.
Mhm.
All right. Yeah, I think these paintings are wonderful.
And
I especially
lastly,
like.
in April, I visited Switzerland, and I also visited Basel and Kunstmuseum, and I had the opportunity. It was a great opportunity to saw the original of this campus. It was also a great experience. So again, to your question, what is the meaning of life? For me, this is the meaning of life. To see these, to see these paintings in the museums with their original, styles. It's a great experience, sublime, just sublime.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I guess we have no more questions then, no more comments. Okay, well, thank you so much, Bahar Hocam. It was a pleasure for us to get to know you and to hear this talk, which sparked our interest again on the absurd art, the art of the absurd, I should say. So thank you, and looking forward to meet you in person in the future.
Hope so.
When we have face-to-face classes.
Yes, hopefully.
Okay, well, say hi to your colleagues in Samsun, and thank you very much again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, and hope to see you again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you
Thank you.
everybody for joining,
Bye.
and
Yeah. Thank you,
Right.
Bahar Hocam. Bye.
Bye.
bye everyone.